Good morning, my renegades. Welcome back to Rogue Radio, and today is another episode of Conspiracy, and I am getting back into the MK Ultra stuff. So, yeah, riveting stuff. Let's just get into it. I know that's a ripoff of Philip DeFranco, but let's just go. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can contact me in the links in the description. Thank you very much. If you are at all interested in supporting Rogue Radio, if you like what we do, if you like what we are putting out for you and all the information that we give, we have a GoFundMe. Every donation that we do receive will be put towards missions and also the expansion of our YouTube channel and our Anchor. Missions is something that me and my husband believe in. We want to help people overseas, and seeing that there are many countries that do listen to this podcast, we want to be able to give back to you as well. And giving into missions and mission work and missionaries is something that we want to do. Our GoFundMe page will also be in the description below, so be sure to click and donate. Thank you very much. We love you very much. Okay, this comes from TikTok, and I found it kind of interesting.
52 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will. A decision was made at the highest levels of the CIA to do testing on unwitting Americans. His aim was to wipe the mind clean. Then he would implant new messages by forcing the patient to listen to a hypnotic repetition as many as 250,000 times.
Programming your whole life. You don't even know it. They do it with your music. They do it with your TV. They do it with your movies. They do it with your games. They have been programming us and programming you since you were little, and you don't even know it.
This 1952 CIA.
It repeats. So that is sort of the gist of what MK Ultra does, and like I said in the last one, I believe that it's still going on, but it's in more of a subtle way in our TV, in our video games, in what we watch, what we see on our phones. So let's get into the whole story of MK Ultra. I told you guys about the beginning of MK Ultra, like where it came from. Now I'm gonna just get into the nitty-gritty of everything and how it works. We are going to delve into a little bit more of the history of MK Ultra. So I told you in the last episode how it was introduced to America, but it was actually thought up in Japan. Listen, I have no idea what I just got myself into, but I'm in it now, so I might as well finish it. The experiments at Unit 731 were incredibly gruesome and heinous and very disgusting and very unholy, just to top it off. And anybody who is triggered by torture or anybody who is triggered by blood or gruesome things being explained, please turn off this podcast, because I'm sure it'll get worse as I keep going. And I'm really sorry, but I have to put the trigger warning up because even I'm triggered by this, and I'm angered and saddened by all of the things that have happened at this facility back in the day, which I know is probably still happening to this day somewhere in the world. And it's evil and wrong. And I am very upset now. But this outside of Japan during World War II, all of this experimentation was happening during World War II. And the Japanese government was doing this, but they did it in a country outside of Japan. That way it wasn't legally tied to them somehow, but human experimentation was happening there, and people were shipped from everywhere. Between 3,000 to 12,000 people died in Unit 731, and they died in pain. And these scientists that were using them, they called these people logs. They didn't consider them real people. And I'm going to be talking about the acts of experimentation in Unit 731, and I'm gonna try to do this as fast as I can, because upon hearing it, it just hurt my soul. But some of the acts that were done was exposure to poison gases. Humans were dissected to see how infected their lungs would be, or how it infected the lungs after they were gassed. Exposure to electric voltage to see what voltage would cause death. Hanging people upside down to study natural choking. Locked in high-pressure chambers. You can probably imagine what happened to these people when they were locked in high-pressure chambers, because I don't want to explain it. Spun relentlessly in centrifuges. Infected with anthrax and syphilis, cholera, and much more different diseases. Flamethrowers were tested on these people. They were exposed to freezing temperatures to observe hypothermia, injected air into people for embolisms research, injected with animal blood to see how their body would react, living dissections, amputations. They also dissected infants, which really upsets me. A group of men and women and children exposed to anthrax shrapnel bombs, and forced pregnancy and abortions. I cannot tell you how much rage I have after just hearing that, and me having to repeat for my audience. But since I have decided to make this decision on MK Ultra, I have to finish it. If I started something, I gotta finish it. I did not think that it was gonna be this horrible, but we're just gonna keep going. And anybody who was excited in listening to this and now they're offended or triggered, I'm very sorry, but this is the reality of it, and I want to be able to inform my audience. Honestly, after that, I think my audience needs a break. So here is the advertisement. Okay, I lost a part, so there's a gap here. So basically, the father of MK Ultra, the person who basically thought this up from Japan, his name was Shiro Ishi, and he was a scientist. He studied medicine in a university in Japan, and further on after that, they were so impressed, they offered him a place in the Japan Imperial Army. And around that time, he was a surgeon, a second-class surgeon for the army. And after his service to the army, he was placed in a hospital where he studied bacteria. And he grew bacteria in petri dishes, and he called them his little pets. Yeah, strange, right? After 2 years of touring in the US and looking at the medical facilities there, he goes on to talk to the Japanese government saying, hey, we need to advocate for microbiological warfare. And at some point, eventually, the Japanese imperial government decided, hey, well, that's a good idea. And they gave him Unit 731. And this is a very massive facility in a place just off of Japan. It's just like near Japan. It's not in Japan, so Japan wouldn't have ties to this. That they gave him this facility, and people were shipped from everywhere, from China, from many different countries. They were called logs, and they were experimented on. And that is where we get into the second part. You want to know how I make some unique podcasts? If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. For one, it's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, and they're easy to use. Anchor will distribute your podcast for free, so that it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download your free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's really fun. Come and join the Renegade family, alright? I lost half of my recording, so we're just gonna redo it. Technicians at 731 have made undercover biological weapons such as poison chocolate gum and hairpins, fountain pens that had needles with toxins dipped in them, industrial scale labs that bred plague-infested fleas, which was a project that was called Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, which was to be distributed. The fleas were supposed to be distributed to the U.S. on the West Coast to try and infect the U.S. That was before he tried to blow up 731, but we haven't gotten there yet. There were anthrax bombs, nearly everything that you can imagine. World War II started to end, and Ishii ordered his prisoners to be killed and had given cyanide pills to his scientists and his soldiers that were helping him do this, and he ordered them to take the secret to the grave. And he ordered to blow up Unit 731. We already got that one. Ishii fled the unit to live with his daughter, but he was found by the Counterintelligence Corps, interviewed in Tokyo for 4 weeks. The U.S. approached him with an ultimatum to be loyal to the U.S. or see what happens when the Soviets get a hold of him. And just for clarification, this happened 80 years ago, so this was not that long ago. This was 80 years ago that this was happening. And to even think back of like your health books and what you learned in high school, all of that stuff, how we learned how syphilis affected the body, how smallpox affected the body, how hyperthermia affected the body, it all had to be inflicted on a human. I don't feel like that's at all okay, but this is what happened. All the evidence, all the things that we learn about that type of, like about illnesses and stuff, is because it's been experimented on by other people. On other people. Ishii accepted the ultimatum, but had one condition: that he had documented immunity, not just for himself, but for his massive number of soldiers and scientists that stood behind him in this research. And, of course, the US granted that. So, they were absolved of every war crime they had ever committed, and to even clarify it even more, all those 12,000 prisoners that they had experimented on never got justice. Ishii handed boxes of evidence. It was countless boxes of evidence of how toxins would affect the body, hypothermia, everything that he researched, he had given them. And the US found this valuable information. Evidence was hidden in the mountains and temples throughout the country, where 15,000 microscope slides, such as each one with tissue and organs that he took from the prisoners, that coincided with the documentation. The US government had an army of people who were experts at torturing people, along with evidence, documentation, and the man who thought it all up. The scientists that tortured these people were spread and installed in labs and detention centers in East Asia to keep the testing going, because the US, it was illegal to have experimentation on humans. They weren't allowed to do that in the US, so they found a loophole. Ira Baldwin, a scientist, believed that they could create a sealed container to produce dangerous germs on an industrial scale. The US reached out to Baldwin, offering to begin a site to create this weapon of mass destruction, and it was called Fort Detrick. About $14 million was spent in making this site. In early 1944, he was asked to make an order of anthrax bombs, and after the war, the order was still in the process of being filled. That's how big the order was. And 200 projects at one time were being created and sort of being tested on throughout the site, producing industrial quantities of anthrax spores, breeding mosquitoes infected with yellow fever, and the pigeon bomb, which their feathers would be laced with toxic spores. This was an actual thing, but nobody actually took it seriously, and I can see why, honestly. This paved the way for MK Ultra. April 16th, 1943, in a lab in Basel, Switzerland, Dr. Hoffman discovered LSD-25 after experimenting with a certain enzyme, the ergot enzyme, to improve the circulation in the blood. The results were staggering, but his experimentation wasn't very professional, I would say. He was just kind of messing with it, and then he eventually shelved it. But the US caught wind of this, and research began on LSD by L. Wilson Green, who wrote a report called Psychochemical Warfare. The US is very obsessed with war and how to win it. One year after the discovery of LSD, the origins of MKUltra were finally birthed. And yes, there's so much more. And that's the history, at least the first part of the history of how MKUltra came to be. It came from little parts. I wouldn't say little parts. I mean, Unit 731 was a God, that would put Vlad the Impaler to shame. That's evil, but there's so much more. There's more projects upon projects upon projects that piled on to create MK Ultra. And they had hired people from Japan who tortured and dissected humans like lab rats. They hired German soldiers who were in charge of concentration camps. Okay, mind you, they got information from German soldiers. Alright? All in just learning how to be the best killer in the world. The US wanted to be that warlord at that time. They took the information from the German soldiers, which was called Operation Paperclip, and one of these days I'll cover that by itself. But it is one of the pillars that kind of holds up MK Ultra, because, like I said, this was years upon years of research upon research upon research until it was like purified as MK Ultra. And so yes. In 1950, MK Ultra, before it was MK Ultra, it was called MK Naomi. I guess Naomi was a secretary, and that was how they named the operation, or the group of Special Operations Division, or the SOD, made a plethora of toxic substances for the CIA to use. They conducted a test on the Pentagon, of all places. They prepared for their preparedness of a biological strike. It didn't work out very well. For the Pentagon, anyways, they were not prepared at all. They disguised themselves as air quality monitors, and the Pentagon let them inside. They were moving around with fake bacteria being sprayed in the air vents. That's what they were doing. And they concluded that over half of the people working in the Pentagon would have been killed if it was real toxin. But that wasn't enough for the Special Operations Division. The CIA was actually doing this. They did this on the Pentagon. Anyway, the CIA went to California, and over a course of days, they sprayed Serratia marsens, which is a bacteria, which to them was harmless, but we'll get into the symptoms that these people actually got later. It was sprayed in the ocean, and they said it was a harmless bacteria, it was red and easy to track, and had no ill effects. Samples from the site of 800,000 residents of San Francisco and Berkeley and Oakland and more were found. Like, it didn't just spread within San Francisco. It spread to Berkeley and Oakland and other neighboring cities. More and more people were checking into the hospital with red urine and with UTI infections. And it killed one person because that person was recovering from prostate surgery. Dude. After this, the CIA wanted to further their steps. Come on, stop. And they wanted to further their steps into mind control. And this operation was called Project Bluebird. And with that, I think I'm going to end it because I have responsibilities. Hey, what can I say? I'll see you next time in the trenches. Thank you for listening to CONSPIRI-SEE.